Welcome everyone to this webinar on provisioning using Vigra ACS Free. My name is Joe Deacy. I'm a Senior Technical Account Manager at DrayTek UK, and I'll be taking you through this presentation today. So in terms of Vigra ACS and provisioning, Vigra ACS offers some great features to provision your entire DrayTek estate, whether that be routers, switches, or access points that you have out in the field. Today we'll be running through some key aspects of how we can manage devices, the types of changes that can be applied, understanding what is happening in the background. What is Vigra ACS doing to manipulate the changes on the CPEs, the customer premise equipment out in the field. We'll look into a little bit more detail about the structure of the TR069 parameters that are on offer from DrayTek, just so that you have a better understanding of what's happening. And this also helps moving forward using the more advanced features. You can utilize those parameters that you are now familiar with and roll out more complex changes across the entire network. So first of all, let's look at device management. I have a test environment in place, and on the screen here you will see on the left hand side a Vigra 2865 LAC model, and on the right hand side we have a version of Vigra ACS Free. This is version 3.6.1 in a test environment that we have. The test environment, as we can see, has got a number of devices. There's 8 devices in total in this environment, and we'll specifically be using this 2865 today to run through changes that are made, see how the changes in ACS reflect in the actual device. First of all, we want to actually get this device into Vigra ACS. This device currently is not registered, so it's already configured, but for those that are new to Vigra ACS and want to see how these devices get registered, the TR069 menu is available on all the DrayTek products, routers, switches, and access points. By selecting this, we can specify which Vigra ACS server we want the device to register to. So we enable the TR069 management protocol, which ACS uses to make any changes and manage the devices across ACS. We also enable the HTTP compression here. This just reduces the amount of data that's sent across between the device and Vigra ACS. It's already got the host name of the Vigra ACS server and the network that it's going to register to. This is username and password authentication that's applied. And this device is currently running on an LTE WAN connection. So there's some carrier grade NAT. So we do need some stun settings in place. The ACS server will be the stun server, and that host name was just pulled from the URL that we've applied. I'll also enable some periodic inform settings. That's just to ensure that the device will regularly poll back to the ACS server and pick up any outstanding tasks that have been created. So let's OK that, save the settings, and what we'll see is we'll see the device actually registering to the ACS server. We can see the status there has gone green. So we can confirm in terms of the router's configuration, that's all set up in place and has successfully registered to the ACS platform. If we refresh the screen here, we can see the actual devices come in, which is great. You can see the device is registered, and we can go directly into the dashboard for that specific device as well. If you are new to ACS, understanding the configuration, making sure you've got the configuration correct is very key, especially if you want to start looking at the more advanced features of provisioning. It's a good tip just to highlight this advanced menu option here when you are focusing on a device. This allows you to send a test inform from Vigra ACS back to the CPE and confirm that full management is available, and any provisioning that you set up moving forward will take place. So we'll start that test, and ACS is going to request that the device send a connection request back. And ACS has now requested information on certain parameters on the device, and the device has responded. So we can definitely confirm here that ACS has got full management of this device, and we can continue looking at provisioning functionality. Let's go back to the dashboard. And the dashboard is an area where you get all the overview of the current configuration in place. Firmware version, WAN connectivity, LAN configuration, wireless as well. So just for an example of how ACS makes some changes to devices, let's look at the wireless side of things. The dashboard is currently telling us that the wireless 2.4 and 5 gigahertz networks radios are enabled, and there's 4 SSIDs on each radio for this particular model, and we can see SSID 1's enabled here. So that's currently has the SSID value of DrayTek there. So let's make a change to that and see what applies to the actual router itself. So here again on the left hand side, this is the actual router we're managing from ACS. We can see the wireless LAN general setup menu, and the same configuration is reflected there. From the CPE dashboard configuration screen, the menus that are available here will reflect what is available on the device itself. So let's find the wireless LAN menu here, and let's go into the SSID submenu. Select this SSID, and we'll just put a new value in place and hit save. So to note, any change that you make in this configuration menu is very much like being in the WAN at the user interface of the device itself. The change is immediately applied. There's no scheduling with this method of provisioning a device from ACS. So we can refresh this screen on the left-hand side here, and we can see that the SSID has been updated. And we can go into the monitoring and logs of Viger ACS to actually see what ACS instructed the device to do. So under monitoring logs, we'll by default land in the all CPE actions, and we can see when this device first registered to the ACS, and it was doing a backup. There's a backup configuration in place on the device registering. And here we can see there was a set parameter applied, and that was just applied just a moment ago. We can select that and bring up the information, which shows some detail there. And there's a bit more detail if you go into this set parameter log as well. We can actually see the username of the Viger ACS user account that applied this configuration change. And we can see it was a manual change rather than any kind of automated profile that was created previously and set up to be applied in advance. Clicking on this, we'll have a bit more detail. Again, we can see the time and date there again. And what was actually applied was this TR069 parameter. This is what Viger ACS sent to the router, along with the new value that we want to apply as well. As long as the CPE receiving this configuration supports the parameter in its firmware version that it has, then the device will apply the parameter and the new value. If the parameter is not supported, the device will just ignore that parameter. So that's an understanding there really of how Viger ACS is making changes to the device using the TR069 protocol, and the many TR069 parameters supported by the devices. If we go back to the slides here, let's look a little bit more into the DrayTek CPE TR069 parameters supported, specifically for this Vigo 2865 series router. When you're in Vigo ACS, you can go to that advanced menu option on the left-hand side and select the parameter tree. When you have the focus on the CPE itself, when you're in the CPE dashboard, you can go to this advanced parameter tree menu. This will load up the structure of all the TR069 parameters supported by the device. So this is one way of navigating through and identifying a certain parameter. What we just applied was this TR069 parameter here. So we'll just follow the structure of the parameter, and the structure does very much lend itself to where you would expect to find it and follow it via the web interface as well. So they all start with Internet Gateway Device dot. The specific one we changed here was the wireless LAN, and this was on the 2.4 gigahertz. Notice the one below there's another TR069 parameter for the 5 gigahertz as well. Within that, you can cascade down to the general dot, SSID dot. There was 4 SSIDs available on this 2.4 gigahertz radio. We've gone into SSID 1, and highlighted there, we can actually see the SSID value that's now currently on the device there, that new private SSID value being broadcast. A couple of options you have from this screen here is you can actually make any configuration change to the values on the right hand side there, and selecting save, again, ACS will push that configuration to the device and update its settings. If there is any parameter that you're interested in here, you can select those parameters and use the copy button on the bottom right. When you do hit that copy button, you can paste the contents to a notepad, and you can see the full TR069 parameter for any of the features that you're looking for. So that's one way of identifying parameters in Vigo ACS. An alternative way is a method that will allow you to export into a log file every single supported TR069 parameter for that firmware version and router model. So we'll have a look at that and show you how this can be done. Here again, we have the 2865 LAC, and we're using the application PuTTY, which allows us to do some logging of the session output. This makes it easy to save all the contents to a specific file for use at a later date. Once you've connected to the 2865 via SSH in this instance, what we've done is apply 2 commands here. We've run a sysver command, and this shows all the information about the firmware version on this device. And the second command is sys tr069 get internet gateway device dot. Running this command will query every single parameter on the device and also provide the value of the parameter as well. So you can see the full configuration that's on the unit by using this command. There are some other options when using this command as well. If you use that same command but add writable at the end, the output of the file that you create will only show the configurable values that can be applied to TR069 parameters on the device. Another command that we can use is the read-only command. Again, we'll create a log file when using this command, only providing the TR069 parameters that essentially just give a status, whether it be uptimes, firmware versions, serial numbers of the device. In addition to this, running these commands that have been displayed here will generate many TR069 parameters. Every area of the router's configuration, whether it's a radio button, a tick box, a field that can be have a specific string added, any configuration that's on the device will have a mapped TR069 parameter. If you want to filter specific areas of the router's configuration and find out specific parameters available, we can use additional structure of the TR069 parameter tree. So here we've done a get on the internet gateway device, wireless LAN, general, SSID. We're also just requesting the configurable writable parameters. Here we have a total number of parameters of 20, and this shows us some parameters for SSID 1, 2, 3, and 4, all supported by the device, and shows the current value for all those parameter configurations. Having this dictionary of all supported parameters really can help when you're trying to find a parameter quickly. You can do a keyword search on the text file that you've generated, and you can really will make it easy to locate the parameters that you're interested in and want to apply across the estate. There are other options as well via the web interface of Viger ACS for obtaining parameters. If you want to use a graphical way of obtaining these. So we'll run through the provisioning features that are available in ACS. Provisioning menu includes global parameters. Global parameters allows you to make profiles that would be applied to many devices, all receiving the same type of configuration. So that might be a new firewall rule, it might be an update to the access control list for a certain organization. Then also we have the CPU set parameters. This allows for more unique configuration to be applied per MAC address. So we can apply some site-specific configuration using that feature. Along with some other generic configuration as well. It doesn't all have to be unique. There's multiple ways you can actually use that feature. We'll cover some of the CPU keep parameters functionality and look at how that can be applied. And then also we'll look at the firmware upgrade options. Okay, so back to the ACS platform. Let's look at the global parameters. So to find all the provisioning functionality in Viger ACS, you'll find that here, this provisioning menu option. So we'll select provisioning and we'll select global parameters. There's multiple ways that you can create an actual global parameter profile. And once profiles are created, you could always see them as a template that can be modified at a later date with updated values. So having them in place really can help update any configuration that's previously been applied using ACS. In terms of creating profile, there are 3 options. This first one, sampling from an online device, allows more of a graphical way of creating and finding the parameters that you need to push out to devices. So let's have a look at that one. We're going to do some changes in terms of the Wi-Fi. We have this select device option here. This allows us to find an online device, a device that's responding that we select, and we're going to query that device to find the configuration that we're interested in. There is the benefit of doing scheduling, so we can set a provisioning time. Now would be the next time that the device is seen by ACS, the next periodic inform typically. ACS would then see there's a task to be applied, this global parameter profile, when it's assigned to a set of devices or a network, and ACS would push that to the device. Scheduled is a useful option to set a window of when this profile should be applied. So if it should be out of hours, or if the configuration you are applying should only be in place after a certain date, this allows you to configure this from here. The reboot after provisioning, ACS will check the response from the CPE once certain parameters have been applied to it, and see if the CPE has requested that a reboot is required. The always keep functionality we'll come back to shortly when we look at the keep settings. So once that profile has been created, we can edit this. And this gives us a graphical view of generating the profile. So in terms of Wi-Fi, there'll be a couple of things that we're going to look at here. What we'll do is look at the wireless LAN, and we'll look at the general. And we want to make sure that the sites that we have out in the field, for example, that the wireless LAN is always enabled and that no one has the ability to disable the wireless using the physical button on the front of the device. So one way we can do that is enable the wireless LAN here. And I'm going to use this keep functionality, which we'll see in a moment. And this is all I need to make in terms of the changes or the parameters that I want to push out to devices. So at this point, I'll select save. Then we'll move over to the 5 gigahertz radio. We'll select the 5 gigahertz option as well and hit save. On the router, just to make everyone aware, the panel control functionality gives you control of the physical buttons on the front of the device. So here we've got the button for wireless and button for factory reset. So we have this available under system and panel control. We'll set a configuration that we want this button to be disabled. So here we will toggle this as off. ACS is currently reading the current value from this device that it's querying. We can see that it's enabled. So what we actually want is for this configuration to be off. And again, this is a configuration that we'll want to keep when we push the configuration out. So I'll hit save on that one. And that's all I'm going to do for this example of a global parameter profile. From the options that we selected from the UI, we have on the top right a parameter checklist. So selecting that we can see that ACS has helped build the TR069 parameters that we require to push out the configuration that we want. So let's exit out of this. And once a profile has been created for global parameters, we can go to network and devices, and we can specify which devices should receive this configuration. So I can select a single, multiple devices that are available here. That Wi-Fi profile is there. But what I will do is I'm going to apply it to the network. In here, I currently only have 3 devices, so this parameter will be pushed out to the devices that are in here. There are a couple of devices here that are actually non-wireless devices, so these devices will essentially ignore this particular profile. But having it applied on the network means that any new devices that are added to the network in the future, and if this profile remains at the network level, those devices will also receive this configuration when they first register. So let's save this configuration. And what we can do is, typically this device would be polling in every 15 minutes, but we can send a test with inform from the device just to speed up that process and show that the configuration has been applied. The wireless for 2.4 and 5 gigahertz is already enabled on this device, but this is a feature that we wanted to disable, this wireless button. So let's just refresh that page, just make sure that that is still the case. We'll go back to management screen and yeah. So let's go to TR069 and we'll hit the test with inform button. If we go back to panel control, let's see if we've got a configuration change on that. There we go. Wireless button has now been disabled. That global parameter profile has been deployed to devices that have polled in from this network. Again, we can look at the logs and we can actually see configuration that's been applied. If we look at the set parameter logs, we can see the difference. The earlier one we applied was a manual configuration. This one now was a global parameter profile. This is the name of the profile and the revision. So every time we hit save in terms of the options we wanted to select, a new revision was created. If you were to make any additional changes to that existing profile and hit save, so it might be adding some additional parameters or changing the value of the parameter that's currently in use, on hitting save, the revision of the profile will increase and ACS will deploy that latest profile to the device because it knows that device has not yet received that later revision number. Just to go back to global parameters, the other options that you do have is sampling from an XML file. So you do have the option to upload an XML file to Viger ACS for global parameters. There is an option to download a template, which allows you to see the structure. Also, you can create new profiles via a new parameter list. And this is where the exported file that you had previously of all the supported parameters could very much come in handy. When we create this one here, this parameter list profile, if we edit that, it's very much gives you the option of copy and pasting the parameter and the value. If I expand this, you'll see that it's have a bit more room there. But the parameters that you have, you can add as many parameters as you want and the values that you want as well. So that's another way of creating the profiles. Let's go back to the profile that we had. So we have we have this Wi-Fi profile. If we hit edit, let's look at the settings. For every parameter that we selected, we did enable the is keep, but on the top level for the profile itself, always keep is actually disabled. So let's enable this function and see what this can provide us. So the revision of this profile now will actually be updated as well. Essentially what is keep will do for the global parameter is if Viger ACS detects that any of the parameters that we wish to keep the current value as always the same, if ACS detects that the value has actually changed on the router, ACS can roll back the configuration to the value that you've set. So an example would be, let's go back to the, let's make sure we do a new inform just to have the latest revision applied. Let's see if that's done by the logs. So go to monitoring, go to logs. Let's see if we've had another parameter there. Yeah, we can see there's a new revision there. That's because we just made that save. So let's have a look at the wireless. Let's look at the wireless for an example. So if we disable this wireless on this router, so the button on the device prevents anyone from disabling it using the physical button, but if there is any access via the web interface and someone's made a change to a configuration like this, they've disabled wireless LAN for 2.4 gigahertz. We'll allow that configuration to apply. And on the next inform, we'll see if the keep functionality will restore the configuration that we always want to be on this router. The wireless LAN is disabling itself at the moment. If we go into the provisioning and global parameters, as long as the profile remains in place, any keep functionality that you have will be applied. The wireless LAN, let's see, I don't think the profile's been applied yet. Let's have a look. No. Let's reapply the disabling the wireless LAN on this router. Disable that. Yeah, okay there. I'll just wait for that configuration to be held. Here's the XML template that you can actually apply from ACS. You can download that template and that will show you the structure of the template that you need to create, where the parameters will be and where the values will be applied. This router now does have the wireless LAN disabled for 2.4 gigahertz. So now we'll go ahead and we'll apply a new inform from this device. If we check the set parameter log, we can see that there is a global keep applied. And if we click on that for a bit more detail, it has restored the 2.4 gigahertz wireless LAN, set that back to true. So there you can see the benefit of having the keep functionality to always ensure that a certain configuration on a device remains in place, even if someone's gone into the interface and made change to that. Okay, let's now move on to the CPU set parameters. In terms of the CPU set parameters, what we do have the functionality now of is to apply specific configuration to a unique identifier. That unique identifier for the devices is the LAN MAC address. So there's the LAN MAC address of this specific device. And that allows us to push any configuration only to this unit with unique values. So that might be a unique admin password. It might be a unique WAN configuration details that needs to be updated on the device. It might be the unique router name for that device. So there's many scenarios where you have unique configurations. So this really can help to deploy that across your estate. In terms of the configuration that's on this device at the moment, if I show you the WAN details here, so WAN 1 is not currently in use, but there is some WAN credentials in place for the username and password. So we've got the default WAN 1 username and a password there. These DrayTek devices do support a fallback account. So this is quite handy should there be a migration to a different ISP at what specific time of day or being unknown, rather than actually having someone there ready to swap over the credentials when the new service is available. We can enable the functionality of the fallback account with the new username and the new password. Should the router detect that it can no longer connect with the primary details that it has, the router will then attempt to use the fallback account. And that will allow the device to restore its WAN connection once the migration to the new ISP has been completed. So let's roll out a configuration change. This would be very much a unique change to a specific site rather than a global change. So let's see how we can push this out. What I have is a XML file that allows us to see all the configuration that's going to be applied. Again, the LAN MAC address is key here. The LAN MAC address is needed to identify what you want to actually apply the settings to, which specific device. So let's show you on the screen here. This is the CPU set parameter XML file that we're going to push across. And just to give a quick indication of what this is, the top section is the items, and these are the TR069 parameters that we want to make the changes to. So if we refer back to the screen here, we want to enable the fallback account, we want the fallback username and the fallback password. So they're the three parameters that we're going to be making the changes to. Here is the MAC address. It's identified as serial number in the XML file, but this is the LAN MAC address of the device. And then here are the values that correspond to the IDs. So enabling the feature, and this is the new username and the new password that's going to be applied. Again, we've got the keep functionality here that we can have. Should the router detect that certain changes have been applied, again, we can use that functionality here as well. So let's go into ACS, and we're in CPU set parameters. So let's import that XML file that we had. It is also possible to do this graphically as well via the add method here, very similar to what we've seen before for the global parameters. But to show something slightly different, we'll use the XML in this case. So we'll upload that file. Here's the file. Open that file and hit apply. If you're doing this from the web interface, you can select one file at a time. But if you have your own self-hosted Vigor ACS platform, you're able to push as many XML files as you need across via SSH. So we've just uploaded that file and that's been taken successfully. If we expand this, we get a little bit more information. We can see the MAC address that this file applies to, and we can see if this has actually been applied yet. So no set parameters applied to this device. Again, we can take a little look here in a bit more detail. We can hit edit here, and we can actually see the parameters that were in the XML file and the values that are being applied. Go back to the profile list. What ACS is now waiting for is for this MAC address to come into ACS so that the profile can be applied. So we'll go into System Maintenance, we'll go to TR069, and we'll have that configuration applied. And when we come back to this screen here, we'll refresh it, we should have those new fallback account details in place. Test of Inform's gone through. Let's look at the logs first. Actually, what we can do on this screen now is if we refresh this and we expand, we can now see that the values have been applied successfully. Those set values have been applied. So again, we'll be able to see the monitoring and the logs. The type of set parameter again will be different because there's a different mechanism being used. We're using a setting profile here, and we've got the XML file version that was sent across. Let's just confirm on the router, internet access, details page, and we can now see the configuration has been populated that we require. Just to note on these CPU set parameters, the later versions of ACS now support the ability to use these XML files on more than one occasion. Once the file has been deployed, it does go to this set value successful state. But at any future point, should you want to roll out that same configuration again to the site, maybe the configuration you've applied has been modified in some way, you just want to make sure it goes back to the starting config, you can select this deploy button, and that deploy button will resend this set of parameters to the device. Okay, so now we can look at moving to the keep parameters side of things. The keep parameters for the CPU set parameter profile that we applied is slightly different. The global parameters only are restored for global keep if the profile is still active on the network or the devices it's been previously selected for. When there's any keep functionality specified in the CPU set parameters, they will be held here in this CPU keep parameter section. So these two are linked. If we expand the network here, we can see the free devices that's in this current network, and the free keep configuration settings that we applied for this device are here. We can see there's free keep values applied. If we hit edit and parameter list, we can see what those were, those fallback credentials that we applied. So CPU set parameters, really very useful feature. It can be used to apply those unique values to any site, easily update your entire estate of admin password or new router name across the board, or for examples of what we've just gone through here, migrating to a new ISP service and holding the correct credentials for that. Let's move on to firmware upgrade. So Vicor ACS has multiple ways of upgrading devices. We've covered that before in some previous webinars. There's the option In the configuration menu, when you've got the focus on the device, you can go into configuration and select system and firmware upgrade, just like you were logged into the router itself. You'd be able to upgrade the device there and then, but there's no scheduling using that method. Under maintenance, there is a firmware upgrade option here. That option there allows for scheduling, which is useful because the router will do a reboot following a firmware upgrade. So scheduling is very useful to make sure it's out of hours or not going to be affecting site. This type of upgrade here is applied to devices. So you can do search for devices on specific firmware, and select multiple devices at a time to be part of that firmware upgrade job. This webinar, being on provisioning functionality, will focus on this method that we've got here. So with this firmware upgrade functionality, this is applied at a network level. So let's see what options we have. We are going to look at doing an upgrade on the 2866s that we've got here. So there's a 2866, both are currently on 4.4.3.2. So let's look at upgrading these devices to the latest firmware. Before you actually start building the profile, first you would go into maintenance and you go to the file manager and you would upload the firmware files to Viger ACS so that when the scheduled time frame for this firmware to be applied, ACS already has the firmware on the server ready to deploy. So we can see that under here we've got different user groups for each company that we've got created. There's a public area where I've just put all the firmware versions of any DrayTek model that is available to me for upgrading the devices. So for 2866, 4432, that's already on the units. There's a couple of other versions available here, 445 and 4451. So what we'll do, the firmware's already uploaded. If it's not already for you, you can select the upload option there and apply the firmware. Recommend that you do use the all file to retain any configuration that's already on the devices, rather as opposed to the .rst file, which would also apply a factory reset upon upgrade. So in terms of provisioning and firmware upgrade, go back to this profile here and create a new job. We'll do a 2866 445 firmware. So we're going to enable this functionality. Here's where we've got the ability to specify when the firmware is applied. So is it on the next inform received by the device, the next communication between the device and ACS? Is it a scheduled window again? Is it going to be between the hours of 8 p.m. and 2 a.m. in the morning? So as long as the device sends that periodic inform, typically it's every 15 minutes unless you have your own self-hosted server and you've modified the value. As long as the inform comes in within that window, then ACS will deploy the firmware upgrade at that point. Again, we've got the specify start date again, which helps to control when these firmware rollouts are applied. In terms of the criteria that we're going to set, we'll set different criteria here. Now we're interested in the 2866 series. You can be specific on the actual variant, or you can use a wildcard there for any variant in that series. So we'll go for that option, 2866. So there are two options that you have in terms of the firmware upgrade. The firmware upgrade types are target or current. There is information in terms of what the differences between the two are available to you there. If it was current, what you can do is specify the firmware that's currently on the devices. This allows you to have a stage upgrade to specific firmware versions. So if you are many of the firmware versions behind and you wanted to do a certain upgrade path, then this allows you full control of that. If the device matches a specific firmware version that you can select, if it's already been into ACS at some point, or specify manually there. And on the bottom section here is where you deploy the next firmware that the device will receive. So that gives you full control of the upgrade path. For DSL version, just use again the wildcard just to catch all different types of modem codes that might be used across the estate. In terms of the different criteria option, let's look at the target. If we're already at a stage that the devices are on maybe the latest firmware version and DrayTek release a new version that you're happy with, you've done your local testing, you can at this point specify what firmware should be on the devices, and when the device polls into Viger ACS, ACS will see it's actually not using the version that you've selected and will deploy that version to the device. So just for this example here, we'll select that. We'll change that back to now. So device does not match firmware version 445 BT. Modem version there, and apply firmware. Here's where we'd select the firmware which was in that public area, and we've got the 445 BT firmware. Now we actually go to the point of which network this is going to apply to. Now within this user group, there's only one network itself, but you might have multiple networks within a user group. So you can select individually per network level if this job applies to that network or not. So we select yes. This firmware would only be pushed out to the 2866 models in the network. There's obviously a 2865 that we've been using. So that's a profile that we can save, and that's a job that's waiting for the devices to come in from Viger ACS.